is Jocelyn Whipple, and I am a TA for LSAT Unplugged. Tonight, I will be your host for this hour. During the interview, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. If you wish to remain anonymous, please send me your questions directly. With that being said, let me introduce our guest for this evening. It is my pleasure to welcome Christina Taber-Kewene to LSAT Unplugged. Christina is a Stanford and Columbia Law educated admissions and academic coach with decades of experience in guiding students through the college or law admissions process. After decades of experience in private commercial litigation and 5 years of head of law admissions for Admit Advantage, she utilizes her experience to coach prospective students as the founder of her private practice named CTK College Coach. Welcome, Christina.
Thanks, Jocelyn. It's great to be with you all tonight.
Thank you so much for joining us. So please introduce yourself. Tell us more about yourself. What inspired you to pursue law school?
That's a great question. So I have to go back a few years for that. I I applied to law school probably at a younger age than any of you, just because these days, many law schools, especially the more selective ones, want to see students who have some work experience. But I went straight from undergrad. So I made that decision at age 20, my senior year of college at Stanford. I took the LSAT and applied and got into my dream school, which at the time was Columbia Law School, because I wanted to study human rights law. I had an undergraduate degree in philosophy and religious studies, and also took a number of courses in peace studies, and was really interested in international human rights law, which I did study in law school, among other things. But I also had a really large load of debt coming out. And so I decided to work rather than work for pay, as opposed to work for very little pay, because I looked at that debt load, and even with the loan repayment programs that I thought I would utilize, I decided that I wanted to have the freedom of paying off my debt. So, but I said, well, if I have to go work at a big law firm, I want to travel the world. So I decided to work at a London-based law firm, and then later at a different London-based law firm, so that I could work out of New York, but also live and work in other places. And I did. I traveled all over. I had clients from Africa to Canada to the UK, and was able to actually live in Germany for a year with my family. So it was a really great experience and a chance to gain a lot of work and travel experience and pay off my law school debts in a few years.
Wow, that is so amazing. So how then did you transition into becoming like a consultant with your amazing career? And by the way, I also had a minor in philosophy, and I also had like a lot of interest in religious studies and that sort of thing. So I can totally connect with you there. But how did you make that transition, and what inspired you to be a consultant?
Yeah, so there were a couple of major factors. One was my really big passion for working with teenagers and applicants, and my second was having 4 kids. So I'll talk about how those dovetailed together. As I said, I did not intend to work in private litigation. It was not my dream. And as I did it, it wasn't my dream either. I loved the chance to travel. I think the training as a lawyer is exceptional. I remember one time we were in London, and we had this expert witness from Belgium, and we had, of course, our stacks of binders and our preparation, and I was actually pregnant with my first and sick as a dog. But he said, oh, you're so prepared. And I was like, yeah, this is what we do, right? I mean, that training as a young professional, I'm sure you can get it in all kinds of ways, but I got it in my 20s as a lawyer. So I'm grateful for the training, but frankly, I hated the work after a while, because it's tedious, and I'm not that passionate about helping companies sue each other. I'm just not. So some people are, or they love the game, and I didn't love the game enough to want to spend my life doing it. So that was one thing. Another was that from the time I was an undergraduate, I had actually volunteered and first volunteered and then run programs in underserved communities, helping kids gain access to higher ed. So I did that when I was an undergrad in California. And then when I was in law school in New York, I set up a program in Harlem, because that's what it's funny how you don't realize what you're really passionate about, but that's what I was doing even in law school. And as a young lawyer, I was running programs for teenagers. So everyone else was doing pro bono work in law. And I was like, yeah, but I have these teenagers who need to get to college, right? That's what I was doing. And so when I finally cried uncle after my third kid and said, I need some time at home, I took that position as head of law admissions at a consulting company because it worked really well for my mom life. And it was back to what I really loved doing and had been doing all along. So it was a great fit for my interests. It definitely wasn't what I thought I would do. It wasn't what I ever went to law school planning to do. But I had to admit to myself at a certain point that it's what I loved doing. And so I did that. Um, Officially head of law admissions, but also doing consulting on undergrad and other graduate admissions. And then in the meantime, built my own practice. And at a certain point, had an accidental fifth baby, which is my business, right? I was like, oh my gosh, I have my own business. I don't need to work for other people. And they were great, but I just developed my own practice. And so now I do continue to consult for law and graduate admissions, but I would say the majority of my work is in undergraduate. It's more complex, frankly. Law school is pretty straightforward in terms of admissions. So, and I really enjoy teenagers. I really like working with them. It's a younger place, but I still love my law school applicants and my grad school applicants. I definitely still do that work. So that's my path.
Wow, that is so incredible. With your transition and how you reinvented yourself and let your passion guide you. So that's totally helpful advice for folks out there who are like, I'm not really sure. I know I'm passionate about one thing and I want to, I'm trying to figure out how to navigate. And with each step, you navigated and you pivoted. So that is so incredible. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the admissions process. How has COVID-19 changed the admissions process, if any, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, it's changed it a lot. I mean, I think for undergraduates, I don't know that for law students it's changed it that much. For college, everything's gone. So I don't know that this audience wants to hear how it's changed for college admissions, but I could tell you all about that. Um, I do think that we're in a world where whenever the economy goes down, graduate applications go up. So that's always true. It's always countercyclical. So I know many people who are, who thought about doing graduate school or law school and are applying now or applied last year because the job market was tough. So I think that is always countercyclical. So as the market goes down, applications go up, which makes it harder to get in. And that goes around and around. That's probably the biggest way things change. And that's not like a permanent change, but it's where we are in the market cycle, I would say.
That's good to know. Are events like, maybe the killing of George Floyd, those sorts of things, gun violence, do you think those kinds of events also impact whether or not people have like an interest in wanting to go to law? Right now, we're seeing an influx with so many people wanting to apply to law school, especially during this cycle. And I was wondering, can that also affect
I think,
things?
yeah, I think so. I think it does. I think that I love that the education that students receive today is so much more enlightened in terms of justice work. And I mean, it was, certainly I was motivated in those areas when I went to law school, but I think it was more of a niche topic, right? Like at Columbia Law School, you had people like that, and then a lot of people who were just very excited to go make some money. Even at schools, like I went to Columbia for its human rights program, and I was involved in that program. I had that fellowship, um, but I was like unhappily surprised to find that most of my classmates were most passionate about getting a big job and making money. It just wasn't what I expected from law school. And I think that given where we are politically and in terms of justice work, that's huge. And I love that that's a motivator for students. The other thing I see, and that's not a trend from COVID, but it is a trend in I would say the last 10 years, that students have become so much more savvy about that school debt. I think when I went to school, costs were high. I remember when I was applying, and I was very young, right? I was in my senior year of college, and I came home for winter break, and can you believe back then? It wasn't that long ago, but I had to actually type my applications on an electric typewriter, which was archaic at the time. I mean, we used computers. This is 1998 when I applied.
You're still young. You're still young.
Yeah. So, but we weren't, I mean, we had computers, but like the applications, we still had to I had to get my parents' electric typewriter out and type in the application. Anyway, and I had all my applications on my parents' dining room table, and my mother was strangely silent through this whole week. And I just said, do you just not think I'm going to get into a top law school? And she said, no, of course I think you'll get in. She said, I'm worried about the debt. And I was like, fine, I'm going to do that loan repayment program for public interest scholars. It's totally not a big deal. Well, she was right. It is a big deal. And because your interests might change. I met this great guy who's an artist. And I said, gosh, I'm going to marry this guy. I'm going to have all this debt, or I could go pay it off in a few years and we can have our children and we can do all these things. So I wanted that financial freedom to do the things I care about. And I'm so glad I made that choice. For me, it was the right choice. Anyway, so back to that. I don't think I was as smart about it as kids are today. I think that whenever I'm talking to students, even if they don't personally have financial constraints, they're not just saying, let me get into that top program. They're saying, who's going to give me the money? And I think
Right.
that's smart. I think that's the right way to think about it, because it is a lot of debt, and it's more now than it was then. And that's true at the college level. It's true at the law school level, business school, medical school. We just cannot look at that. I think my generation looked at it and said, we'll figure it out. And, I did. Lucky me, right? I went to a top law school. I knew I could get a job. I figured that out. That is not the case. The economy is not what it once was. And unless you're at a top 5 school, you're going to really face some constraints based on that debt. I lived in Germany for a year, and this was at a time when I did not love my job, but I was very excited for the opportunity to do this arbitration. And my husband and first child were there. And I was really surprised that so many lawyers I worked with loved their work, because guess what? In Germany, they didn't have any debt. So the kids who wanted to work at law firms, they went and worked at law firms. The ones who wanted to be judges went and became judges. Whereas in the US, at least for my generation, almost all of us went to law firms because we all had to pay off all that debt. And so what a better system. So we're not there in the US, but it really made me think a lot about how misshapen our system is in terms of the debt load. So I think that's a huge trend in the last decade. I think COVID accelerates that. Again, people are just so much more conscious of the debt load, but that's the biggest shift I've seen since my generation of law students.
Wow, that is amazing. I wanted to kind of touch on something that you mentioned at your time in Colombia. You said you participated in a fellowship. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a program. So Colombia always has been known for the human rights work, and there's a human rights journal, which I was on. And there was also a fellowship, which didn't pay my tuition, but it was something you applied for in your first year at the time. And then you had opportunities to do summer internships that were funded through that fellowship. So I did participate in that, and also wrote for the journal, for the Human Rights Journal.
Hey, that's awesome. Do you encourage folks when they are looking at law schools to make sure that they have an idea what kind of journal, or if they're interested in a particular type of fellowship, to be looking out for those things as they're going through and scanning the choices? I'm assuming that's kind of what you were doing in navigating your process.
Yeah, my process was apply to the most prestigious law schools, but particularly I was interested in Georgetown and Columbia, because Georgetown, and I would say Georgetown, NYU, Columbia, on the East Coast especially, are known for the kind of public interest work and focus. I mean, I wanted to be with classmates who were interested in those things. I was really spoiled undergraduate in my work at Stanford. I felt like my classmates were all really motivated to learn and grow, as Ron Liebert, who wrote a recent book, he's a New York Times journalist who talks about the financial aspect of funding college and graduate school. But he said, we still have this idea that college is a place to get your mind blown and your mind grown. And I really experienced that as an undergraduate. And I thought that professional work, law school, would be the same at a top school. And that was just my naivete. I'm just jaded. Sorry, I'm a jaded lawyer. But I did feel surrounded by very smart, motivated classmates. but it perhaps wasn't the Eden that undergraduate was, where people were really interested in learning for learning's sake. I think it was very much less so in law school. And I don't think that's a slam against Columbia. I think that's just law school. And I was naive going into it thinking, I'm just going to go learn. And I wanted to be a lawyer very much. It wasn't like, people say, oh, I want to go to law school just to learn. I wasn't like that. I wanted to be a lawyer. I loved writing and arguing and all of those things. So to answer your question, yes, I think you want to pay attention to the climate at the law school, to the tenor, to what they value, what they talk about. You may see a disconnect between what a school touts and what students actually experience. And so to the extent that you can talk to current students, I think that's very valuable. I do.
Awesome. So as it pertains to, and I'm going to switch gears again here, we're going to talk a little bit about the personal statement, and how to make those clear connections, right? As far as your passion, what you're interested in, and the reason why, you want to go to law school. One of the things that I've been hearing from admissions counselors and deans is that in the cycle, they've been hearing a lot about social justice. That has been the theme, that's been the topic, human rights. And with that being said, if someone does go that route, how do they make sure that their essay stands out in a situation where you have so many people talking about social justice as it relates to their personal statement? How would you suggest they go about doing that?
That's a good question. And I'm going to answer it a little more generally and then specifically. So I think that with respect to any personal statement, you will stand out when you speak from your heart. And I don't mean in some kind of ushy-gushy way. I mean from your experience, from your passion. So I remember distinctly when I was writing and I had no advisor or counselor or anything, but I was writing my law school application essay, and I did draft after draft after draft. And I was finally felt like I had a good version, and I showed it to a few of my friends. And I remember sitting down with my friend Judy, who was an econ major, and she said, well, Christina, it just seems a little, personal. And I said, oh, good, then I've done my job, right? Because this is the thing, law school, more than any other graduate or professional program, really, really is still a program that wants to hear from the personal. I sat on an admissions panel once with the dean of, it was Vanderbilt Law School. And she said, if I'm sitting at my desk and there's a cocktail reception for prospective students outside, and I'm reading through my stack of folders, I want to read, Jamil and Nadia and Sam's essays and come out and recognize them when I talk to them, right? It should be personal. And so I think that advice still stands. So if you're into social justice work and you care about those matters, you should write about them. Like, I don't think there's any wrong topic, but hopefully you have some experience. You've done more than just share things on Instagram, right? And you don't have to have, been the DA of California. You won't have that. But so when we think about college, it's very aspirational. When you think about law school, it's a mix of experience and aspiration, right? A little more heavy on the experience. You're a little older, many will have work experience. And so you want to draw on that experience and passion. So don't turn away from the things that you care so much about, but you will stand out with your perspective. So that's the difference, right? Speaking from your own perspective and your own experience. I want to say one other thing about that topic, that balance of aspiration and experience. I think that law schools do want to hear some somewhat specific career interest. So, by the way, it can change, right? I think a lot of kids hesitate, or applicants hesitate. I shouldn't call you kids, right? Like, you're adults. A lot of applicants hesitate to say, I want this path, because they say, well, but I want this or this or this or this. That's fine. You're a lawyer, right? That's how we argue in court. Well, Judge, Your Honor, this, if not that, then this. If not that, then this. It's fine. It's okay. It's how we think. But when you write that application, don't do that. Don't give them that scattershot. Present the clearest image you have of yourself. They know it's going to change. You haven't gone to law school yet, for heaven's sakes, right? But do present the picture you think that you have, because you don't want to just be dreaming, right? So you can say, I have this interest in public service. I've had this time working for um, 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 I'm trying to think of the name of a legal organization, like public interest law, legal services in New York
Urban
City,
League.
with housing and welfare, provisions. I've done some work volunteering there, and I've also helped people in this way, and I think I could see myself doing this, and eventually perhaps working in politics, right? I mean, you can have a couple of options, but I think a mistake is when you say, I'm interested in helping people, I like helping people, I want to help people as a lawyer. It's just too general, right? By the way, what's the difference between that and a social worker or a therapist, right? All good things, but some specificity there in the end that no one is going to hold you to for the rest of your life. But give them that image so they know that you've thought deeply about where you want to go and how that really relates to a law education.
Wow, that's amazing. So in that, and making those clear connections and making sure that you're very specific, can you talk a little bit about the distinctions between, the personal statement, the diversity statement, and optional statements or essays? How you should utilize them, because oftentimes you'll find that there's somewhat redundancy. They might say something in their personal statement and then replicate it in different ways in their diversity or optional statements when it's just fine in the personal statement. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So there are two different points there, right? One is, should I write a diversity statement? And two, or another kind of optional statements. That's sort of three questions, right? There are other optional explainer statements. There's the diversity statement, and then there's the personal statement. We don't want any redundancy, really, because why bother, right? You think of your application as a beautiful peach pie or pizza or whatever circle graph you want. But if you've presented this picture before, why are you presenting it again? I don't like redundancy. I mean, lawyers hate redundancy, so don't do it. You might have an idea you've touched upon in your personal statement that you expand upon in a diversity statement. Totally fine. So this is something to think about. So there's this question of like, am I the person who should write a diversity statement? Some schools have extremely broad diversity statements, right? As broad as, tell us how you see diversity in your life, or how do you contribute to diversity on a campus. Others want you, if it relates to you because you're an underrepresented minority in some way, whether racially or otherwise. So be careful about, answer the question asked. And if it doesn't apply to you, really don't shoehorn yourself into it. I don't like that. I think it feels false. So if it's the right statement, you fit the bill, please write it. And so that's something to think about. If you're an underrepresented minority and you'll have a diversity statement to write for all your schools, then perhaps your personal statement should not be about being an underrepresented minority, right? It should be about a different topic. You want to get as much information about yourself that's relevant, sorry to talk like a lawyer, but like into the record as you can, right? So that's first, right? So before you even begin your applications, you may think, am I the kind of person who'd be writing a diversity statement? If you are, then think about it being a little distinct. Then there's that other statement, and I don't know if you wanted to ask about that too, but there's sort of that, do you need to explain something? So I'll just talk about that a little bit. It's a little bit of a different topic, but
Of course.
students often say like, well, should I explain that I got a 155 on my LSAT and then I got a 160 and then I got a 167? And I say, no, because they know that. And why draw attention to that? There's nothing to explain that's already explained. Sometimes there's something that needs to be explained. So you failed a class in college. You feel like your LSAT score does not represent you as a student because you have tremendous test taking anxiety, right? If there's something that needs to be explained, do it in a pithy way that explains but doesn't excuse. So the kind of note that your mother would be happy with sending to a school, not and then this happened and my dog died and my roommate ate my homework. Um, I don't like to see statements like, boy, I was really caught up in freshman rush and then my fraternity for the first 2 years of college. So sorry, I wasn't a better student, right? I think a better explainer is, I wasn't a focused enough student. I take accountability for that. Look at my last 2 years of college. I really worked hard and that shows my real acumen. So be careful about those, not to sound like you're making excuses for yourself, one, or two, to explain things that are already obvious on the record.
That's a really good point. And I'd like to actually follow up with a question on the addendum. For reapplying applicants, in what instances should the addendum be used, if it should be used at all? Should reapplying applicants utilize that, especially if they're reapplying to a school that they really wanted to but got denied the first time?
I guess there are a couple of ways to present yourself when you're a reapplicant. The most important information is whatever has changed since you applied the first time, because if there's nothing to show that's distinct, then they don't care to see you again. Thank you very much, they say. So if it's already in the record, right, let's say your LSAT score went from a 162 to a 175, well, then they know it. So again, I wouldn't have a student write an addendum about something that's obvious. And then again, if there's work experience, volunteer experience, that ought to be on your resume. It should be clear. I think you can use that addendum to point things out, right? You can say, I am reapplying. You'll see on my resume this and this and this, right? But I would keep it pretty short if that's what you're doing.
Good to know. Good to know. So we're going to switch gears into getting in touch with schools, right? At what point should applicants demonstrate their interest? Is it summer or spring better than the fall, early fall? How would you suggest, or at what point do you suggest applicants reach out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't want to reach out ahead of your application cycle, right? So law schools, colleges, professional schools, they have their cycle and they're dealing with their admitted students right now, right? So if you're just now considering applying, say for next cycle, for this coming fall, I wouldn't reach out, because you'll get, even if they're willing to talk to you or see you, you'll just be forgotten, I think, in the shuffle of getting all their new students in. So I would suggest not doing much before late summer at the earliest. I mean, if you have, let's say you happen to be in New York City or you happen to be in LA, and there's schools you're interested in and it's before that, of course you can go do that. I just think it's tough for admissions offices to think about anyone other than their current cycle of applicants. So you're at a disadvantage if you're trying to talk to them before that. But anything after that, I think, is fair game. And I always want applicants to reach out if they can, because if you're around and you're interested, reach out to the admissions office. Every single admissions office is different. Some will welcome you with open arms and give you a tour and sit down with you, the dean of admissions. Others will say, good luck, whatever. But reach out, because they do care about that demonstrated interest. And that's something to show in your application as well, especially schools that are not those top 15 national schools, right? They want to know if you're serious about them, especially in local markets, right? So if you're coming from Indiana and you're applying to schools in Minnesota, they'd like to know why, I think, right? Do you have some tie there? Do you plan to practice there? Because it shows that, in a way that's totally different from undergraduate, because many lawyers are going to practice in their local market, at least at first. Even people who plan to switch coasts later, it's pretty typical. In fact, I found that when I was interviewing for jobs for my 1L summer, or after my 1L, right, for my 2L summer, I had come from California. I was from the East Coast, and I had people ask me both directions, right? Like people who looked at my resume and said, well, why are you applying in New York? You're from California. And I said, I'm not from California. I just went to college in California, right? But people are always, whether it's schools or employers, they're actually pretty sensitive to that topic, that they just don't like to admit people or give job offers to people who they think aren't serious about the location. Believe it or not, a lot of law students interview at law firms. I know this is a little ahead on your timeline, but they'll interview at law firms just to get that free flight out to some place, right? And so law firms are kind of onto that. So So just be wary, or they're wary of you, and just be alert to that. So if you're serious about interviewing somewhere that's not the city where you're working, um, know that you'll probably want to show some actual ties there. And so same thing for law schools. Again, when you're outside the national market, outside those top schools who don't care because they know that you're just interested in going to a top school. Yeah, definitely. And those are the schools, um, outside the top 20, I should say, really, that are going to pay more attention to demonstrated interest because they're more sensitive to yield numbers.
Now, how do you, so when people are looking at schools, right, how much should they keep in mind, I guess, where they ultimately want to be or ultimately want to work when they're applying to schools? Because from what you're saying, it sounds like it's extremely important to keep that in mind, that you want to go to a school where you end up, wanting to work in that environment, in that area, essentially.
I think it's not required, but I think it's a bigger consideration than many students realize. I think that many of your biggest job opportunities will be in your local market. Again, even at a top, I went to law school in New York City, and a majority of the people from my graduating class stayed in New York at first. Um, and this is a top nationally ranked law school, right? So it's not to say, and again, I think at a top law school, it's easier to get jobs outside that market for sure. If I had wanted to go to LA or Boston or something, I definitely could have. But you'll just find that it's going to be easier. So I think that you don't have to get a job where you go to law school at all. But I think that law schools are sensitive to that, and employers are sensitive to that. And so as a student, you should be alert to that in a way that I think you just don't even think about when you apply to college usually. But for law school, you should be aware of those market influences.
That's good to know. Um, see here. What are some questions? So you talked about, making sure to reach out to the law school. What are some questions that you would see typically applicants just kind of overlook that they should be asking, that you encourage them to ask?
That's a really good question. I think there are some things that every every applicant would want to know about a law school. First of all, there are the weed out law schools, right? You want to make sure that if you're applying to a weed out law school, you know it, right? You don't want to pay tuition for a year and then get dumped from the school. I think that's a terrible model, but there are schools like that, right? That admit a lot of students with low stats, and part of their business model is just making money off them and then dumping them. So I'm not going to name names at all. That's not what I'm here to do, but I think you should be alert to that as an applicant. Secondly, and by the way, that's an okay way to go if that's all you can do, right? For some students, they don't do well in the LSAT and they don't, right? But they can get themselves into one of those schools and then do well, but just be alert to it, to that phenomenon. Second, I think that you really want to know what kinds of opportunities are there for you after law school. So with the first thought, it's of course knowing the graduation rate and things like that for the law school, making sure you're in a law school that actually graduates its applicants. Secondly, bar passage rates, right? That's huge. Again, at tippy top law schools, they don't really matter because it's not, my civil procedure professor called himself the Flying Dutchman. He was this 80-year-old, lion in the field, and only taught us about Roman law for the whole semester, which had nothing to do with anything on the exam or the bar. That's what it's like at those top law schools, and that's fine. So it's not that those law schools prepare you for the bar. My colleagues who went to places like New York Law or Fordham were much better prepared for the bar. We were into the big thinking stuff, right? But you know what? The students of those top schools are fine because they go take their bar prep course and they're smart and they learn it and it's fine. So I don't mean to say that it's about how well the school prepares you, but how well do those students do? So whether you're at a top school and the students themselves are going to make it happen, or at a less well-ranked school and you need to make sure the school helps you prepare, you do want to look at bar passage rates. That's important. I think that another thing to think about is how do they fund any kinds of um, opportunities in the summertime, right? So can you get funding to do public interest work if that's, or government work or anything else? If you're interested in those opportunities. I think a lot of the really great work that happens that I did not take advantage of in law school because I was young and naive, but I now have many friends who work as clinical law professors. So it's something I'm so much more alert to is clinical law programs, right? Those are sometimes just the heart and soul of a law school where you really learn and gain experience and gain passion for certain areas. So looking at their clinics, what clinical programs they have where you can really dig into certain areas, whether it's mediation or housing law or criminal justice. I think those are often the best opportunities for law students. So I would encourage students to look at whatever clinical law programs are available at the law school as well.
Wow, that's good information to know, particularly in terms of making sure that you can have something to do over the summer. And one of the things that I actually want to follow up on with you is when you're like applying for admissions, for example, is it better to make sure that you apply for the fall? There are some programs that offer you the opportunity to start in the summer, right? And so, are there advantages? Are there disadvantages to that? Do you caution people? What is your outlook on that?
Yeah, and that it depends on the kind of student you are, right? So
Right.
let's say you're a later life learner and you already have a job and you're getting your law degree kind of off cycle or part time. I don't think it matters if you don't need to transition fields, right? It's all about the job. But for someone who needs to get, I mean, whether it's law or government or judicial clerkships, there's a cycle, there's a seasonal cycle to that. And so if you're off cycle, that could be a problem. So I would want you to make sure that whatever you're doing, you will have time available in your schedule to take advantage of those kinds of summer opportunities. That is, whether it's a summer 2L program at a law firm so that you can get, that's where you basically are going to get your offer to go be a lawyer. So that's usually where you get your first job. So if you're off cycle for that, that's a problem. Or again, externships at clerkships and things like that. So I think that strong programs are accounting for that, but I don't know that every program is. And I would be really leery of, and I don't want to malign any particular law school, but if a law school has really poor statistics on graduation rates, bar passage rates, employment rates, I really don't like students to go there. It makes me really nervous. Law school costs a lot of money. It's 3 years out of your life. And so I think that law school or bust is not always the right plan. Um,
Mm.
and I'm not denigrating any particular school or saying you have to be this smart or have this LSAT score to be a successful lawyer. But I do think you should be careful about going down a path that is not set up to protect you, right? Whose interests? Um, Trump University was never there to protect students. And there are some law schools that remind me more of Trump University than Harvard Law School. So be alert to that. Be alert to any kind of program that doesn't have your best interests in mind.
Thank you. That is definitely some things that I didn't even consider when I saw a lot of opportunities open up to start earlier rather than in the fall, traditional fall. Um, so that is something that I will definitely make sure to keep in mind. Um, so we're going to switch gears to work experience. Something that I saw in your article for I think it was the ABA student lawyer blog your article was called Prepare for Law School During Your First Years in College. But I think that what you spoke about as far as paralegal work not only like applies to those who are, fresh, applying for law school straight from undergrad, but those that are recent college graduates that are like kind of trying to figure things out as they're looking to apply for law school, or those that are married, have family, have kids, and are wanting to apply for law school. So my question, I guess, would be, as it pertains to that, why working as a paralegal doesn't give you necessarily a competitive edge?
Um, I'm not telling people not to work as paralegals. It can be good experience.
Of
I've worked
course.
with many people who worked as paralegals after college and then went to law school. There are kind of two tracks for paralegals. So there are the lifers, right? People who that's their profession. And then there are people who do it for 1 or 2 years. And some of those big white shoe law firms actually have programs, right? They kind of bring in people with really great stats and they expect them to go apply to top 10 law schools after 2 years. So it's not that it's any kind of ding on your record, not at all. And I think it can help you understand what you want to do. I mean, I know many people who worked as paralegals and said, this is not for me. I don't want to be anywhere near a law firm. I don't even want to be a lawyer. So I think it's a great experience. And when I was an undergraduate, I did volunteer and had internships in public interest law firms. And maybe I should have paid attention to how boring I thought the work was, even in places that did work I cared about. I thought it was kind of dull, but I didn't listen to that signal. I was very young. So um, I just think that often undergraduates think, oh, I'll work as a paralegal and that will help me get into law school. It's a dime a dozen. So I would rather students and recent graduates did work that they found meaningful. Um, Whether that's working as an analyst at McKinsey or an investment bank, or working for Teach for America, or taking a Fulbright, or whatever it is, I think you will stand out more by following what actually interests you. So paralegal is fine. It's just common and not always the most useful thing you can do.
So, from what I'm understanding, you're saying that, just to be clear, uh, being a paralegal, if that's something that you want to do, totally fine. But it is not. It's something, again, to add to your work experience and exposure, rather, which I think is amazing. I've actually considered doing it, but I was wondering whether or not, just in the larger scope of things, especially for recent undergrads like me, that are wanting to make sure that they have some sort of work experience or some exposure before applying for the next cycle. I think that that is definitely helpful. Um, so again, I wanted to switch gears a little bit to, I guess, the financial aspect. Earlier in our conversation, you talked about, being able to travel and making sure that you were able to pay off your loans, which is definitely, an awesome thing to be able to do, especially in terms of law schools is concerned. And so for me, I was wondering, just dealing with, I guess, school offers and the financial package, how do you think people should approach that once they come to that point? Is it really a negotiation of sorts, or is it more so reconsiderations, asking the school to reconsider whatever package deal they give to you? How do you suggest people handle that?
I think everything's up for negotiation. You're in your strongest negotiating stance once you've been admitted, of course, because if a school admits you, it wants you to come. So of course, I don't mean to state the obvious, but people do this. Don't start talking money until you have an offer in hand from a law school. Secondly, you'll be most persuasive if you have other offers, right? So if you can say, hey, law school X, law school Y, which is comparably ranked, right, has offered me this much. And I really prefer you for these specific reasons, right? I really do want to go to your school. Could you match that offer, right? That's usually the most helpful way to do it. Now, if you don't have any competing offers, you can still make that ask. And lead with honey, not vinegar, right? So I would say something like, really interested in your school because of this and this and this, right? And who I am. It would make a world of difference to me if you offered me some help to get there because I I have to live for the rest of my life. Um, however you want to phrase that. But I think everything's negotiable. Schools need to fill their class. They have a certain amount of money to shuffle around. So if you don't ask, you don't get. And that's something, again, I don't think that I understood when I was applying to law school. I think students, applicants are much more savvy about that than they used to be. And that's a good thing. Don't be surprised though, like if you say, this third tier school offered me money. First tier school is not going to necessarily match that, right? You have to have something that's from a comparable level school for them to probably take it seriously. And you can also ask for scholarships, right? You can say this, and also, do you have scholarships to which I could apply that I don't know about, right? Always offer that. And while we're on negotiation, I think wait lists exist for a reason. And I think so many students think, oh, I got waitlisted, so it's over. And that's not true. Now, you don't know how big that wait list is. You don't know where you fall in it. You don't know how it works. Schools are totally opaque on purpose about it. But the number of people I know who got off the wait list and got into Harvard or Stanford or whatever, so many. I knew a guy I was in law school with who was literally driving across, this is before cell phones, driving across the country, or before they were common, from the West Coast, was headed to Duke, and he called his parents from a payphone, and they were like, you got a call from Columbia. And he called them, and he'd gotten off the wait list, and he just rerouted up to New York City. I mean, it happens. So I would also say don't give up. And if you're really interested in a school and you're on the wait list, call and express your interest, write that letter, whatever else the school will. Now, don't pester, but if they say you can send more material or you can visit, do those things, because those who ask get more than those who don't ask. So whether it's negotiating for money or trying to get off a waiting list, go for it.
No, go for it, guys. So really quickly, I wanted to ask, just kind of overall the general process, something about the general process, and your advice on how, on whether or not would it be the same for a person who's, definitely that's did the traditional route like you did, that's transferring or transitioning from to law school directly from undergrad to law school, or for a family, a wife, she's working, she's trying to study and all of those things. What kind of would your advice change or differ, and what would that or where would that advice, I guess, differ or change?
There are so many reasons why people go to law school. So I think when people are mid-career, you're usually looking at something that's convenient that will fit into your life, right? So your local law school and at night and affordable, or the law school, the kind of program that your employer will pay part of the tuition for. I think it's a totally different set of options when you already have an established life for most people. So I don't even know how to compare those two things, except to say I don't think they're comparable. Usually a matter of what's going to work for someone. Like, I can't even imagine going to law school at this stage of my life. But if I did, and I know people who do, I usually say don't go to law school at that stage. I'm not sure it's worth it. But because it is years out of your career in debt. But for some people, it's the right choice. And for them, it's usually something that's evening or part-time, and it's local, and it's much less about the prestige of the law school as whatever doors are going to open in your career by having that specific degree. Maybe you work in compliance at a bank, and if you go to law school, you can move up in the general counsel's office, right? So that is often the reason. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure I answered your question.
I think it did. So one thing that I've been realizing is that sometimes when we have a lot of discussions about, the admissions process in general, we forget that there are people out there who are, married, they have families, and they also, are wanting to pursue law school or make a career change or make a shift. And I wanted to make sure that those people are also like included as well in navigating it, because it's a maze. It just says the law school admissions process. It's a maze and it's a beast for anyone at any stage, whether or not you're directly transitioning to law school from undergrad, or you're a recent college graduate and you're trying to take some time off to figure out how to get there. But I wanted to make sure that I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about that, and what you see, or tips that typically help people that are in that space.
Yeah. Okay. So just to confirm what I said, I think ROI is really the biggest consideration for people who are mid-career. Um, what are you going to get out of this? It's not a pipe dream. Unless you're single and have all the money in the world, which, if so, great, go do whatever you want to do. But most of us have families and mortgages and careers and partners. And so if my partner said to me, I want to go to graduate school, I would say, great. Why? What are we doing? How would that affect our family? Is it going to pay off in your career? We've both thought about that at different times, since our initial graduate degrees. And I have to say, every time we've said, we don't need to do that. There are better ways to do this. We both were fortunate to get our education done at a certain point with graduate work. And I haven't felt that it made sense for me to get another degree for the time and money. Maybe I'll change my mind someday. When my kids are grown, I might go get a PhD in religious studies because I love it, right? And if I don't have to work, great. But for law, it's a pragmatic, it's a professional school, right? It's not just for fun. So I think return on investment is really the first consideration. And I want people to take that really seriously. Don't just think about the cost of law school, but the actual cost, the opportunity cost, right? You're losing your income for the year, those 3 years, and paying for school. I mean, it's a huge, huge cost. So sorry if I sound like a grown up, but it's just a really important thing to think about. But when you're younger, then you can take on more debt. You can take on more risk when you're younger. And it's sometimes the right choice to take on that amount. I took on a huge amount of debt and risk, and it was fine. I was fine. And it informs everything I do now as a professional, right? If I hadn't lived in those places and had that work experience, I couldn't advise students in the way that I do now. So I'm grateful I made those big risks. I didn't realize how risky they were. That's called the benefit of youth and naivete. But when you're older, yeah, different set of options for sure.
Definitely, definitely. We only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to share any final thoughts or talk about anything that we didn't cover, with the audience. Of any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'd love to say one thing, which is you are not where you go to school. I know that's easy for me to say because I have fancy schools on my resume. So I recognize the hubris of that, but I mean it. Um, I worked at fancy, fancy law firms, and I'll tell you, yes, it's harder to get in the door if you don't come from Harvard, Columbia, Stanford. But once you're in the door, so let's say you do really well at Albany Law School and you're the top of the class, right? And you can get in the door at those top firms. The people who do well there, it's about effort, work, savvy, right? So law, unfortunately, is one of the most conservative and um, elitist fields, I think, that exists. I've never cared where my kid's pediatrician went to medical school. I just care that she's a good doctor. But law firms, if you want to make partner, yeah, some of those firms, they still care about your law school transcript and where you went to law school, no matter how much money you bring in. So I don't mean to say that it doesn't matter, but for most of the world of law, outside of clerking for the Supreme Court and working at certain top New York City law firms, it's what you do with what you've got. So I really want to encourage applicants to, one, be smart about the investment and the time and the money, because it's not the right path for everyone. I know literally a gajillion people who are onto their second and third careers because they hated being lawyers, right? But for some people, it is the right path. And if you can take the risk and do it, great. And if you don't get into the top school, but it's still a good choice, go for it. You can go be an excellent lawyer and do great things with your life. So please don't track your identity to where you get into law school or which job you get, because that's sort of the pit of despair, right? And we all fall in it sometimes. But I would encourage you not to, because I know many people who are extremely successful who don't have one single fancy school on their resume. And whether success means money or helping people or doing things in government, people have different definitions of that. But I know people who are successful in all of those ways, regardless of where they went to school.
Wow, that is awesome. And I hope that is a great motivator for you guys, especially during those times where you're studying an LSAT problem and it didn't work out the way you thought. But to keep yourself motivated and remind yourself that you will be an attorney, you will pursue and do exactly what you want to do. So with that being said, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your time with us, Christina. Where can people contact you, find you, if they want to get some more consulting advice?
I'll type my website in here into the chat window, but you can find me at ctkcollegecoach.com. And I offer free consults to anyone for 20 minutes. So you can just book that on my website. I'm always happy to talk to prospective applicants about the law school or any other undergraduate or graduate admissions opportunities. And thank you for having me, Jocelyn. It's great to talk with you tonight.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please remember that the session is recorded, and if you'd like to refer to it again, you can. Also, check out Steve's interview with Christina back in 2019 for more tips on navigating your law school admissions journey. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you again.
Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.